So, in a little over a week, there's going to be a big card at the StubHub Center in Carson, California, headlined by Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez versus Wisaksil Wangek, aka Srisaket Rungvisai. This is a rematch for Rungvisai's WBC Super Flyweight Championship that he managed to defeat Roman Gonzalez back in March of this year by majority decision. Managed to defeat him and get the belt off of him, given Gonzalez's first loss in the midst of trying to crack into that good old Marciano slash Mayweather now Mayweather undefeated championship record of and possibly retiring afterwards. But incidentally, Gonzalez does have the loss on there, and this is the rematch of what was really a good fight. Definitely, I'd say one of the fights of the year, one of the best fights of the year. Competitive throughout. I wouldn't say it's fight of the year by any means. Honestly, I thought that Gonzalez deserved to win the first fight. I've kind of made that known in multiple different instances and places where you might hear from me outside of just these videos that I do here on YouTube. These audio analysis, I guess you might say. But I did think that Gonzalez, after a kind of a shaky start against Srisaket, where he wasn't expecting to have an opponent that was just that physical, that strong, that powerful, in Srisaket. I did think that he was able to kind of sharpshoot him towards from the middle into the end rounds, and was basically kind of hitting him a lot more than he was getting hit. Let's say, just the idea of boxing as a sport of it's about hitting and not getting hit, and Gonzalez was doing that fairly well. Of course, he did have that cut above his eye, but that was caused by a head clash, and there were multiple head clashes throughout the fight. And it seemed like really most of the damage that Srisaket did was primarily with his head. I mean, actually, even the knockdown in the first round, their heads actually collided in the midst of Srisaket landing that right hook to the body. And it seemed like, the punch and the head clashing kind of together. Not saying that Srisaket necessarily did that intentionally, like he was, at the very least, that he was like trying to knock Gonzalez down with his head. But I think he's one of those guys that kind of very free swinging, and his head goes where it may, and it's up to you to defend against it. Basically, he's just kind of one of those rough house, kind of crafty, slick, fighters that is able to kind of hide things well enough that he's able to kind of get away with them. He has had multiple head clashes in past fights, but incidentally, going into this second fight, I do favor Roman Gonzalez in the rematch, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that on top of the fact that I thought that he won the first fight, I thought that he managed to get the timing together and adjust late in that fight in order to get that victory. And also, he was able to make those adjustments in a fashion where he was landing more cleanly in the later rounds than he had been in the earlier rounds, as well as making Srisaket miss, and also or otherwise kind of blocking or catching and shooting more Srisaket's punches towards the middle and later rounds than he had been in the earlier rounds. And really, a lot of the competitiveness in those more like middle and later rounds was just by virtue of Srisaket being so physically powerful. He's a guy that where Gonzalez would be hitting him flush, and he would just keep coming right after him. Like a lot of those body shots and head shots that in combination that Gonzalez would normally land against guys and really put him on notice, really put him on the back foot. Srisaket was able to take quite a few of them. There was only a couple of instances where he was hurt. He proved to have a hell of a chin, and also, a good, I guess, iron body, I guess you might say. He was taking the body shots really, really well as well. But, I think that even though Srisaket is fairly crafty within the style that he has, I did think that Gonzalez was able to adjust to it in the first fight, and I think that if anything, that in a second fight, having a second look at him, Gonzalez will be more prepared for some of the slightly illicit tactics, as well as more prepared just for the physicality that Srisaket brings. Really, that was the first fight. I guess you could somewhat toss in Quadras in there to a degree. That was but it was the first fight where it's like Gonzalez had an opponent that was able to kind of physically match him, and even kind of physically overmatch him in terms of strength. With Quadras, it tended to be a little bit more in terms of speed and stamina. With Srisaket, it was a lot more in terms of strength. And that you could even kind of draw a parallel to Juan Francisco Estrada, who's actually going to be on the undercard, of course, fighting Quadras. I'll preview that in a separate video. With Estrada was able to match Gonzalez in terms of skill. Quadras was able to match and even somewhat outdo Gonzalez in terms of speed, like hand speed, foot speed, and stamina, in terms of, just being able to hold up that conditioning, hold up that high work rate, hold up that high action, that high pace in the later rounds. And Srisaket was able to match and somewhat outdo Gonzalez in certain aspects with regard to just brute force, brute strength, the ability to kind of take a punch and just shake it off like that. And also, even be able to, even if he wasn't necessarily hitting Gonzalez especially cleanly, he was moving him quite a bit with a lot of the shots. A lot of times there were shots where Gonzalez would either block him, deflect him, partially block him, or what have you. But the thing is, Srisaket is such a brutal puncher, like, he's a brutal power puncher in terms of being, a knockout artist. If you just look at the number of knockouts that he's had in fights, as well as just being very physically strong. There's a difference between being a big puncher and being a physically strong guy. Timothy Bradley is a physically strong guy, but he's not a big puncher. Shawn Porter is a reasonably big puncher, but he's not like a knockout. He's not an Errol Spence. He's not a Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman actually and Shawn Porter would be a good way to kind of juxtapose that. Keith Thurman is a very big puncher, but he's not like a physically strong, like imposing figure, like in there, where he's able to move you and push you and like kind of put you where he wants you to be. Shawn Porter is. Shawn Porter is a very physically strong guy, but he doesn't necessarily have that lights out power. That power that, at the very least, it can kind of turn the tide of a fight or what have you. With him, it's really more he's kind of grinding you down with that power, as opposed to hitting you with that single shot, and then at that point kind of following up on that in order to get a stoppage or at the very least kind of start the beginning of the end. But and the thing is, Gonzalez, for the style that he has, it's a very high risk style, especially against a puncher like Srisaket. It's I even in my preview before their first fight, I was saying don't sleep on Srisaket. He was a very, very, very live underdog. The way that I saw it, especially the way that the bookies have it, especially in that regard. And hopefully some of you took my advice with regard to that and made out pretty well. Because the way that I saw it was almost like a Joe Frazier and Gonzalez kind of wading in to the power shots and trying to kind of swim without getting wet, so to speak, against like a George Foreman-esque puncher in Srisaket. I'm not necessarily saying that that he has as much power as Foreman, or even in the pound-for-pound sense, but just the way that the styles kind of mesh together, that's just kind of what it brought to mind. And so it was where I saw that Gonzalez would have to be really on his P's and Q's and be sharp and not be able to afford to really make mistakes in there against Srisaket. And he really didn't make very many, to be honest. I thought it was a fairly hard-fought fight. He generally landed the cleaner, more effective punches, the sharper punches, from my standing. But Srisaket was able to at least make it physical enough and make it, gritty enough to make it so that the judges that wound up seeing it his way. And he may have even benefited a little bit from some of the backlash that came from the scores in the Carlos Cuadras fight, actually, because I've said it before even that a lot of times when there's a lot of uproar, like fan uproar, or a lot of critique for a given scorecard for a particular fighter, a lot of the times the next judges will somewhat overcorrect, like they'll be looking a lot harder at that particular fighter, and like that fighter will have to prove more than they might necessarily would have had to otherwise. So I think they might have been taking more of a critical look at Gonzalez, at everything that he was doing, in light of the criticism that the judges for the Cuadras fight got. Because if anybody I thought deserved to actually defeat Gonzalez, it would have been Cuadras, just considering the general pace of the fight. And even just the in a round by round sense, that was a fight that was really the first fight that I thought Gonzalez might have lost. He might have lost it. Estrada, I thought there was a certain degree of that as well. Although that one, like the Cuadras fight, I did think that it was a draw, but I thought the Cuadras fight, if anybody really deserved to win that, it might have been actually Cuadras, in terms of having to weigh it out between a draw and somebody actually winning the fight. With Estrada, I thought it was weighted a little bit more towards Gonzalez, but going here against Srisaket, this is a big fight. This is kind of a do or die fight for Gonzalez. Not necessarily in terms of career prospects. Obviously, even if he loses to Srisaket again, if he was to move back down to 112, for instance, he would pretty much be able to take care of anybody there. It's one of those things where it's like when people start rating you pound for pound, and when you're at this high of a level, and when you're moving up weight class after weight class after weight class to the extent where the opponents are clearly just bigger specimens than you, it becomes a lot more difficult. Just being able to reach those same peaks, those same heights that you had done at 112, at 108, at 105. Just look at what some other fighters have done. As they've kind of moved up weight classes, they haven't necessarily been as effective. They've been effective still reasonably well, but not in the same necessarily dominant fashion. Because the opponents can take punches better, they give punches better, and who knows, maybe they're a little bit more skillful as well. And super flyweight is a very deep division overall. The top 10 is basically the most talent-packed top 10 in the sport of boxing. And like I said, this is a do or die for Gonzalez, because based off of this, the mandatory for the WBC is going to be the winner of the Cuadras versus Estrada fight, which I see as a very, very big threat. Either one of them I see as a huge, huge threat to potentially put another loss on Roman Gonzalez's record. Especially in light of the critique that some of the judging has gotten for both of those fights, actually. So if anything, the two of them might even get a little bit more benefit of the doubt than Gonzalez would in rematches with Gonzalez. And then, of course, Naoya Inoue, who's going to be on the card as well, fighting Antonio Nieves. Nieves is a reasonably good fighter, but, a guy that he's not necessarily too dissimilar from some of the guys that Inoue's already defeated. So you'd expect Inoue to come through in that fight. And it's looking like, the kind of the stars are aligning, so to speak, or the networks are kind of aligning things to be that Naoya Inoue is supposed to potentially be the next big name. He's supposed to be like basically the next big thing at the lower weight classes, as far as I think that they're concerned about with regard to where they see kind of the hype going, where they see kind of the trends of fandom and such going, and which isn't to say that he doesn't deserve it. I think Naoya Inoue is every bit a top 5 pound for pounder, if not top 3. He definitely has the accomplishments to prove it. He definitely has the skill set to have proven it. The accomplishments maybe a little bit less so than the skill set, at least recently, because he's basically just been knocking out or knocking off number one contender after number one contender since the Narvaez fight. But otherwise, even still, it was really, really impressive, the fact that he was able to win that title at 108 and then jump up to 115, take out the top guy. The guy that was basically the man of the division. Not unlike what Jesús Corrales did, for instance, against Takashi Uchiyama. But I'm kind of digressing into alternate territory here. But this is a big fight. If Gonzalez wins, the next looming fight is obviously going to be either the Estrada Cuadras winner or Naoya Inoue. And I'd imagine it's being probably weighted a little bit more towards Inoue, simply because of the fact that Inoue, I think, the networks probably see a little bit more star power with him, and also the potential for growth with him. Not only in the physical sense, because he's talked about moving up to bantamweight and even higher, and being slightly higher in weight tends to bring about it like slightly bigger purses and more attention, at least as far as a lot of the Western markets are concerned. The United States, the United Kingdom, etc., where there's a fair few people that are a little bit size discriminatory, I guess you might say. But it's a big fight. I'd imagine that if he manages to get revenge, Gonzalez will be fighting against Inoue. And hey, if Srisaket manages to repeat the same victory that he had this last time out, he'll have started to really make a legendary name for himself in terms of boxing as a Thai fighter, especially. Definitely kind of starting to kind of lay the groundwork for cementing his name as one of the all-time great Thai boxers. As well as getting himself in position to get those nice big paydays against the likes of Inoue, Cuadras, Estrada, etc. And he's another guy that could very well carry a certain degree of star power with regard to just the fact that he has an action-packed style. It's a very fan-friendly style, and one that I think people would definitely tune in for. It's almost like there's not too much of a no-lose situation here. With regards to who winds up coming out on top, except for maybe with Juan Francisco Estrada. I do still think that HBO and everybody else basically was trying to kind of keep Estrada away from all these other guys, because his style is a lot more of a technical one, not necessarily kind of the easily accessible casual boxing fan, snatching, grasping, eye-catching style. It's a lot more of a technical boxing style, more of like a Marquez style as opposed to like a Barrera or Morales or a Pacquiao style, which would be a bit more akin to the other guys that I already mentioned. But this is going to be a good fight. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I hope you guys are as well. Let's see what happens, man. I'm sure it's going to be fun. So, catch you guys in the next one. Peace.